The first bite of Christmas. Christmas is a time of celebration, and what better way to celebrate than popping the cork on one of the many fine Kiwi sparkling wines, or the French equivalent. But try not to get too carried away with the cork popping, since these projectiles are the perfect size to fit neatly between the orbital rim, delivering a nasty blow directly to the eye. Popping corks have been recorded at up to 80 km per hour or 50 miles per hour. So when this patient rushes in to see you in your urgent care on Christmas morning, accompanied by a grumpy family member who is equally worried about the state of their turkey or Christmas ham, what do you need to be extra careful to look out for that might just further ruin their Christmas? Here is Director of Clinical Training, Dr. Dave Sorrell.
So I was unfortunate enough when I was 18 to be hit by a flying L&P cap, which put me in hospital for a week with an eye injury. I didn't have an orbital blowout fracture. So the three injuries to remember, to consider and to exclude are 1, orbital floor fractures, 2, high femur, and 3, commotio retini. So all three of those must be ruled out in that situation. So remember, if there's a history of blurred vision, commotio retini and high femur must be ruled out. Now, the thing about that is you're really going to need to dilate and examine the retina. That may not necessarily be your first treatment choice, and that can be done by an optometrist or an ophthalmologist. But unless you look for all three injuries, if there's any significant history, you will miss it. My son was unfortunate enough to have a commotio retini and a high femur from a football, but it could be similarly from a squash ball. So when you're examining for orbital blowout fractures, you've got to remember that they can be relatively tricky and radiology can be not very useful. So I examined 365 consecutive x-rays in 365 days between two hospitals in Waitemata DHB. We found the sensitivity of plain films to only be 50 to 60%. So we created a clinical decision rule, which was called facial objective radiology by clinical examination, which of course comes with the acronym the FORCE. So we always said you'd use the FORCE to rule out a facial fracture. So if we consider all facial fractures, we would be looking for a number of clinical signs. When you're talking about just orbital floor fractures, you've got entrapment or diplopia. So classically, it's outwards gaze that is most inhibited. So you always look for that. You'd look for infraorbital numbness, so on the cheek there, to see whether there's any significant difference. You'd also be looking for surgical emphysema. So if they got hit in the face and then they blew the nose and it puffed up, that is a fracture either within the ethmoid or the inferior orbital floor until proven otherwise. So the way I would do it, and there were other clinical signs that we looked at, like CSF leak, obviously mobile facial bones, battle sign and raccoon eyes, but that was looking for the more severe facial injuries. If they had a FORCE negative, we would go ahead and do radiology because your predictive value is now lower. Bearing in mind, if your FORCE was positive, so you're saying this person has a blowout fracture, that means you need a CT because your X-ray is not going to rule it out. And you don't know whether it's going to need surgical management or not, especially if there's entrapment. You need to know how bad it is. And then when you do the radiology, you look for those teardrop signs and also the elephants of Rogers and the lines of Dolan, which are the classical facial fracture lines. But in reality, the X-ray is a very poor rule out. Clinical examination is very, very important. And again, as I say, high femur, commotio retini, blowout. Those are all the three things you get from the cork injury, or in my case, the L&P cap.
I should point out, for those of you not based in New Zealand, L&P is a carbonated lemon drink that is world famous here. So make sure you keep an eye out for those injuries and always try and practice safe and responsible decorking. We will be back tomorrow with the second bite of Christmas. I look forward to seeing you all then, but for now, thanks for listening.